Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of the follow-up annotations for Act 1, Scene 3 that we didn't get a chance to talk about in class. So one of the first ones that we're looking at here is lines 39 to 42 on page 17. We've got the messenger here before the ships arrive. And the question is, how does the evasive formal language used by the messenger reveal the way Othello's position has impacted on his commitment to abstractions? What we can see in the language that this messenger uses to Montano: your trusty and most valiant servitor, with his free duty, recommends you thus and prays you to believe in him. This is a series of what we would call conventionally deferential, formulaic set pieces of speech used by those in diplomacy or in the military. Signor Montano, your trusty and most valiant servitor. So we've got here this formulaic representation of deference to someone of superior rank. With his free duty recommends you thus. So with his free duty sounds almost like a kind of oxymoron, but it's a way of saying, that someone loves the job that they are tasked with. Here in this diplomatic formulation, he's enjoying his work so much that he calls it free duty, and prays you to believe in him. We've got this kind of sacrosanct language as well. So this is simply a mode of address that borrows the language of nobility, of servitude, and of a kind of sanctified rhetoric that we can see has impacted on the way that Othello understands himself, because he uses exactly this type of language to make sense of himself and to talk about his identity and his role in the Venetian state in the play. Okay, a little over the page, the Duke says, "Valiant Othello, we must straight employ you against the general enemy Ottoman." In these lines, we want to work out how the Duke, the directive that is issued by the Duke, how does it reveal Othello's centrality in the Venetian state? Well, the speed that he's interested in employing Othello. We must straight employ you against the general enemy Ottoman. It's not just against a particular battle. This is against the entire empire. And that this sense of urgency and the scale of the enemy that Othello is tasked with defeating tells you very quickly that he's the first man that they think of, that he is the central figure in defending the Venetian army. So we can see his vital importance to the state through those lines, that they directly require Othello, and it's against this vast empire, this rival empire. A little further on, lines 54 to 57, Brabantio is whinging again. He's whinging a lot in the play. The question is how he draws upon a verbal pattern of supernatural imagery to describe his loss. How does this language expose his racism? And he says, "For my particular grief, it is of so floodgate and o'erbearing nature that it engluts and swallows other sorrows, and yet is still itself." Oh, sorry, we're looking at the wrong lines here. In these lines, Brabantio personifies his grief. How does this language reveal both his hysteria and his racism? His particular grief is of so floodgate and overbearing, is so excessive, that it would burst the floodgate. Shakespeare's doing his classic antimeria here of taking a noun and turning it into a verb. It's of so floodgate and overbearing in nature. Sorry, taking a noun and turning it into an adjective here. This is a kind of hysterical verbal construction that's actually shifting the foundations of grammar in order to make sense of itself. And it's giving his grief this enormous power, which is a way of kind of deferring responsibility. He's not taking ownership of his feelings. And you see that a lot in characters in Shakespeare plays, whereby their emotion seems to be dictating their actions. It's precisely the thing that Iago has such a kind of virulent hatred towards. It engluts and swallows other sorrows, and yet is still itself. It's almost like this kind of macrophage, this consuming, assimilating grief that engluts. It sort of gobbles up all of his other worries and yet retains its essential identity. So by gobbling up all of its other cares, it doesn't change or diminish. So his particular grief is sort of anthropomorphized here, is given this kind of biological, kind of pathological quality, where it is engulfing all of his other worries and yet retaining its integrity and its identity, i.e. it's staying the same and it's still acute and significant. So this hysterical state is obviously what leads to the following lines, which are much more to do with this verbal pattern of supernatural imagery that he draws upon frequently to express his kind of racist hostility to Othello. And he says, "My daughter, oh my daughter," and the senators say, "Dead." "Aye, to me. She's dead to me because she's married a black man. She's abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells and medicines brought of mountebanks, for nature so preposterously to err, being not deficient, blind, or lame of sense, sans witchcraft could not." And this is where he explicitly articulates this. For nature to err, to make such an error of judgment that's so preposterous, without being deficient in sense, or sensory blind, or lame in some intellectual way, this could not happen without witchcraft. So he 100% believes that some kind of supernatural charm has been kind of imposed upon his daughter, and that is the single reason for her attraction to Othello. So again, we see this image pattern here particularly. Spells and medicines and witchcraft being used once again to express his virulent racist hostility towards Iago and his Othello, and his relationship with his daughter. Page 19, a little further over. The Duke. What is illogical in the first of these lines, exclaimed by the Duke? Hath thus beguiled your daughter of herself. Again, his language sides with Brabantio and joins in with this conspiracy, this sort of verbal conspiracy to blame something supernatural and beyond the normal causes as being responsible in some way for Othello's and Desdemona's relationship. Something has beguiled your daughter of herself. So not only here is the language blaming an outside party, but it's actually suggesting that Desdemona has no agency of her own. You know, it's robbing her of agency whilst at the same time accusing Othello of being this kind of the embodiment of witchcraft and exposing their racism. But importantly, and you of her. And this is where we get this very concrete reminder that women are still seen as the possession of their parents and eventually of their husbands also when they marry them. And these following lines remind us of this. It says, in the following lines, how does this expose the way in which the powerful flexibly adapt the law for their own benefits, which in this case are extremely racist? Something has beguiled Brabantio of his daughter, but the bloody book of law you shall yourself read in the bitter letter after your own sense. That actually the statutes of Venice, the Duke is empowering Brabantio as a fellow kind of potentate, as a shared wielder of power in the Venetian Republic, with the ability to basically interpret the law as he pleases, to flexibly adapt the law until it becomes a bloody book, until it becomes this kind of vengeful wielding of an Old Testament style wrath by a vengeful father. You shall yourself read in the bitter letter after your own sense. So there's a kind of suggestion that Brabantio can be creative with this law according to his own inclinations here. So there's a real clear siding with Brabantio because of the material value of his daughter, because of her actual monetary worth, and the fact that this is testament or tantamount to some kind of theft, this relationship that has gone on without his consent towards a racial outsider. Yea, though our proper son stood in your action. So he is here effectively joining Brabantio with himself in a sort of family of white nobility. There's a really strong materialist resistance to Othello and the threat that his relationship as a racial outsider poses to the sort of material and civic order of Venice here. This is really about money, this speech, and the willingness of the powerful to side with each other and defend those material interests. We take a little jump past some of the lines that we looked at closely in class to Brabantio's lines on page 23. He says, "Come hither more," again, a really kind of patronising and clearly racist way of addressing this esteemed individual. And we're not talking about some kind of young servant, we're talking about someone who is seen by the state itself as central to their military plans. "Come hither more. I here do give thee that with all my heart, which, but thou hast already with all my heart, I would keep from thee." Now this make use of a rhetorical trope called a chiasmus. Remember we encountered this when we were looking at Emily Dickinson's poetry. It's a rhetorical structure in which you have a reversal of sentence components. So, "I here do give thee that with all my heart, which but thou hast already with all my heart I would keep from thee." So if you imagine "I here do give thee" as A and "with all my heart" as B, we have a reversal of this. "With all my heart, B, I would keep from thee, A." And it's almost like a kind of sentence holding a mirror up to itself halfway through and seeing its reflection in the mirror. But what it usually is used to evoke is a sense of parallelism, paralleling two ideas. And what we very clearly gain from this is a sense of his racist hostility towards Othello, and the fact that this willingness to pay lip service to the directives of the Duke and to go along with his desire to esteem Othello as a noble figure in the Venetian state, and basically being ordered to shut his mouth and get on with the situation. And he says, "I give you with all my heart, which if you didn't already have it, I would with all my heart keep from you." So he's very clearly making it explicit that he is only willing to give up his daughter because he has been directed to do so by someone in a superior social position to himself. So in this case, we see this kind of racist reluctance to admit to his loss here. And this is further articulated, this idea that he's not willing in his relinquishing of his daughter. Question 7 says, "The Duke's aphorisms here all communicate the idea that patient acceptance of loss eliminates suffering. What cynical reading of his motives might help to make sense of his reasons for attempting to placate Brabantio here? Consider Othello's importance to the Venetian army." So, one of the important ways of reading these lines is to see in them the Duke's material interest as the leader of this nation state. These series of aphorisms are meant to be kind of consolations, like "dry your eyes, mate, there's plenty more fish in the sea." They're supposed to encourage people to take misfortune stoically. When remedies are past, the griefs are ended. So when remedies are no longer useful, the things that you require them for, the griefs, are also gone. By seeing the worst which late on hopes depended. So by seeing something that you recently were longing for meet some kind of unfortunate fate, and therefore the grief itself is over. So when remedies no longer work, the things that they were required for are also ended, because the bad thing that has occurred has actually ended the thing that required hope. To mourn a mischief that is past and gone is the next way to draw new mischief on. So to mourn something sad that has happened is the likeliest way to bring about something new that is bad that has happened. What cannot be preserved when fortune takes, patience her injury a mockery makes. So what can't be preserved when fate or fortune that we see, this kind of Elizabethan understanding of it, taking something from your life. Patience makes a mockery of the injury of fortune. So patience is empowered in this kind of aphorism as making a mockery of the injury that fortune inflicts on us by simply being stoic. The robbed that smiles steals something from the thief. He robs himself that spends a bootless grief. So someone who is robbed that bears it with patience and is capable of smiling steals, obviously, some form of satisfaction from the thief who has carried out this stealing. And you only rob yourself if you spend a bootless grief. So if you spend some form of frivolous sadness, it's equating it to some kind of cheap thrill. What we see in these lines, obviously, is the Duke trying to convince Brabantio that he hasn't really lost anything and that he should just grin and bear it. That is because, in the cynical reading we're talking about here, he understands that Othello is the only military general that is capable of preserving his interests in Cyprus and needs Brabantio's assent to smooth this process over, to smooth his dispatch to Cyprus. So he's trying to convince him basically to grin and bear it and get on with it so that they can go about the business of protecting the nation state of which he's the leader. Brabantio, though, he knows this. Brabantio is not stupid as much as he is a racist old fart. He's not an idiot. And the question is underneath, how does Brabantio's response reveal his understanding of the Duke's motivations? Well, let's take a look at his response. He says, "So let the Turk of Cyprus us beguile. We lose it not, so long as we can smile." He very directly knows that the Duke's motivations for these aphorisms is the material interests that he locates in the island as Venice's ruler. And he directly addresses it. "So let the Turk of Cyprus beguile us of our possession, steal our possession from us. We lose it not, we don't lose the island, as long as we sit there smiling like an idiot and letting them steal it from us." So Brabantio, again, he responds directly to these material concerns with his own formulated aphorisms. So he catches him out straight away. A little further on, page 214, 215, lines 214, 215, sorry. A little further down in his speech, he says, "These sentences, to sugar or to gall, being strong on both sides, are equivocal. But words are words. I never yet did hear that the bruised heart was pierced through the ear. I humbly beseech you, proceed to the affairs of state." There's a sort of reluctant misery about his lines here. The question asks, what does Brabantio's rhyme here reveal about the slippery instability of language? And why does Shakespeare choose to write this exchange with the beauty of full rhyming couplets? These sentences that he is issuing here, these rhyming couplets that they both are issuing to try and convince each other about the nature of their dispute, he understands that there is something inherently sugary about these fully rhymed couplets that are written in this kind of beautiful metre. These sentences, to sugar or to gall, being strong on both sides, are equivocal. He understands the instability of these words, and actually what he mistrusts and what the Duke tries to take advantage of is that these rhyming couplets and this rhythm give these statements a kind of a harmonic, kind of chiming quality that seems to emphasize their persuasive effects. That just because they rhyme, it gives them this timeless quality that makes it sound like the advice that they're dispensing is all the more logical. And so he's aware that the sound of this language is the sugar. It sugars the meaning. It sugars the Duke's plea for him to just grin and bear the loss of his daughter to an outsider. But he understands them. He understands the gall behind these lines. He understands the bile and the nasty truth that these lines are masking, and he understands the equivocal nature of language. So writing in these couplets is designed again to reveal to us that this highfalutin, overblown kind of abstract language that those in power have the tendency to use when they communicate with each other is equivocal and fundamentally untrustworthy at times. And it is this precise slipperiness and engagement in abstract ideas that Iago both takes advantage of and resents so strongly. And that's where we get the linguistic register differences between himself and characters like the nobility and Othello. The final question, how do these lines foreshadow Iago's destructive manipulation of Othello? This final statement that Brabantio makes, I never yet did hear that the bruised heart was pierced, they should say pierced through the ear. I humbly beseech you to proceed to the affairs of state. Well, this is precisely what actually happens to Othello. I never yet did hear that the bruised heart was pierced through the ear. It's Iago's slanderous kind of incitement of jealousy through his lies that bruises Othello's heart and pierces it through the ear. You know, it's through Iago's use of deceptive, manipulative language and lies that he manages to wound Othello emotionally. He becomes extremely jealous and untrusting of Desdemona, and that lack of trust is precisely what drives the plot towards its kind of grim conclusion. So this offers a kind of a grim prediction of what ends up driving the narrative of the play, and it is directly connected to this sugary, equivocating language.